As a small nation relative to big and powerful neighbor, with a grand design on its territory, the Philippines has always believed that international law is the greatest equalizer among states. It is exactly this belief that made us confidently resort to the compulsory dispute settlement mechanism of the United Nations Convention of the Laws of the Seas, or UNCLOS, and the Hague Tribunal. We view the 2016 arbitration award as not only setting the reason and right in the South China Sea, but also as an inspiration for how matters should be considered by states facing similar challenging circumstances. We underscore that the award is not directed at any country, with the Philippines seeing it as it should be seen as favoring all nations subscribing to the rule of law. The award is conclusive, as it is indisputable, definitively clarifying a legal situation beyond the reach of arms to change. It is authoritatively settled the status of historic right in the South China Sea and declared as without legal effect claims that exceed geographical and substantive limits of maritime entitlement under UNCLOS. As the chief architect of the Philippine foreign policy and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has strongly emphasized his directive to safeguard every square inch of our territory from any foreign power. Mindful of his guidance, UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitration Award are and will continue to be the twin anchors of our policies and actions in the West Philippine Sea and broader South China Sea. Anchored on the transparent laws, the Philippines will likewise continue to seek for transparency of actions in the maritime domain, thrusting gray zone shadows into the light. At this juncture, allow me to express that the Philippines welcomes the increasing number of states that have come in support of the award and what it stands for, an affirmation of the preeminence of the law and the triumph of amity over ambition. We realize that right alone does not make might, as it is ultimately your support that will preserve the global order at sea and uphold the universally recognized principles of international law. Along this line, we welcome the G7's recent statement, which reaffirms the legally binding nature of the award and all other statements made by the governments around the world will uphold the ruling as a milestone in corpus of international law. In the same vein that the Philippines underscores the resolution of the complex competing claims in the South China Sea in accordance with international law, we also hope that relevant parties to other land and maritime disputes in the region would find peaceful and effective ways to manage their diverging positions without prejudice to their respective legitimate rights. As the old adage goes, good fences make good neighbors, as it is only when neighbors have clear boundaries and respect for such boundaries would relations remain genuinely amicable. The 2014 agreement between the Philippines and Indonesia concerning the limitation of our exclusive economic zone and similar maritime delimitation agreements reached by other countries in the region, as well as the resolution of territorial issues between Indonesia and Malaysia over Sipadan and Litigan in 2022, and Singapore and Malaysia for Pedra Branca and Middle Rocks, and the Southern Leads in 2008, are a strong manifestation that resort in international law continues to be paramount in the peaceful resolution of fundamental differences. On the pursuit of dialogue and multilateralism, I understand, however, that fostering the political will and mutual trust to sit down for constructive dialogue and reach an agreement to abide by a shared system of norms and values is not an easy feat. Nonetheless, I dare to affirm that the multilateral system, even in the face of heightened geopolitical tensions, remains as the uniquely inclusive vehicle for managing mutual interdependencies in ways that enhance both national and international welfare. In many ways, a remarkable example that multilateralism works even in the region of diverse as Asia-Pacific is manifested by the history of the ASEAN. As enshrined in the 1967 ASEAN Declaration, the inception of the ASEAN was founded on a partnership of equality and mutual benefit, with member states undertaking not only to ensure their peaceful and progressive national development, but also to put their differences aside so as to proceed with active collaboration. Such declaration by nation, which only 2 years earlier were in a state of confrontation with each other, could be regarded as a near miracle. And the fact that ASEAN has weathered all difficulties since then means that its foundation has been solidly laid. Ladies and gentlemen, acting in isolation and decoupling amid the declining state of goodwill in the region would only serve the return of an Iron Curtain that will undermine any potential for confidence building and cooperation between and among us. It is in this context that ASEAN remains as a cornerstone of the Philippine foreign policy. ASEAN's principle of openness, transparency, and inclusivity represents its continued equitable treatment of norms and principles, offering a neutral ground where all table their interests in the region. It is only in this light that the Philippines continues to seek a substantive ASEAN-China Code of Conduct in the South China Sea through a process that perseveres despite the pressures of destabilizing actions and incidents on intimidations. Wars are not inevitable, but a result of our grave failure to resolve our fundamental differences. When the risk of conflict looms, it is time for more dialogue, not less. It is along this line that ASEAN must be strengthened as an institution for building strategic trust and cooperations which are at the core of preemption. I am pleased to note that just recently, the Philippines hosted the second ASEAN Multilateral Naval Exercises, or AMNEX, an initiative which promotes interoperability in response to common maritime challenges that shape the regional security architecture. The exercise was also held back-to-back with the 17th ASEAN Navy's Chiefs meeting, which adopted the Navy-to-Navy guidelines for maritime interactions with the aim to contribute to the implementation of international maritime law and convention. In conclusion, I would like to end my remarks with a quote of Albert Einstein, that peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, the preservation of prolonged peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific rests on our accountability to the rule of law and the success of our cooperation amid diversity. As we face increasing geopolitical risks, which are compounded even further by the consequence of climate change and the legacy of the pandemic, the Philippines remains committed to diplomacy and dialogue to build the aggregate resilience of the region as a whole. Thank you for your attention, and mabuhay.
Carlito Galvez, thank you very much for, at the start, reminding us of the increased emphasis that the Philippines is now having to place on coastal defense, but also near the end of your remarks, reminding us for quite how long a time ASEAN has been discussing a code of conduct with China. And I'm sure we will examine both those points in detail in the conversation. Could I now invite the Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace of the United Kingdom, to take the podium and address our second plenary.
Good morning, and thank you to ISS for hosting, and it's a privilege to be here in Singapore. an island nation and trading powerhouse with which the UK has much in common, not to mention a shared history. And I'm delighted to share the panel with my colleagues from Canada and the Philippines, just two of the nations we're working closely with to keep strengthening the international order that benefits everyone. Lots has happened since the last UK Defence Secretary spoke here, and the world already looks different in so many ways. We fought off the pandemic. We did that by collaboration, not by isolation. The UK has had 3 prime ministers, and we've lost our great Queen. Her similarly great namesake, the Queen Elizabeth Aircraft Carrier Group, made her maiden visit to the Indo-Pacific in 2021. And that same year, the United Kingdom published the Integrated Review, signalling our increased commitment to this region. That review has been updated this year, and we're pressing ahead with our tilt to the Indo-Pacific, not least becoming ASEAN's first new dialogue partner this century. Of course, events in Europe are focusing us closer to home at the moment. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine is forcing a rethink of the Euro-Atlantic security architecture, and it has spurred yet more countries to seek the collective security of NATO membership, precisely what President Putin claimed he was acting to prevent. But as busy as things are at home, developments continue apace. The Indo-Pacific economic performance makes this year the world's undisputed growth engine, 40% of global GDP, 60% of global shipping, home to half the world's population and some of the fastest growing economies and most innovative economies in the world. But apart from seeking to secure blocks of interest, we believe this region offers enormous economic opportunity for all. It's why European companies and countries are looking east, and why the United Kingdom government considers our interests to lie as much here as they do in Europe. Indeed, in 2022, our total exports to the Indo-Pacific amounted to £127 billion, a remarkable increase of 22% on the previous year. Yet just as we seek to benefit from the opportunities here, so must we also share responsibility for the challenges. And in both regards, none are bigger than the epoch-defining rise of China, as it was described in our Integrated Review refresh. We are all now navigating the consequences of China's rise, both those opportunities and those challenges, lifting vast numbers of people out of poverty, trading with the world, and the undeniable truth that none of our most fundamental global issues can be solved without engagement with China, be they climate change, energy and food security, economic stagnation, tech regulation, and nuclear proliferation. But must we also speak plainly and acknowledge that there are also challenges from that rise: illegal fishing tensions in territorial waters, sovereignty disputes, and debt diplomacy. This session, Mr. Chairman, asks how can we create balance and stability in the Indo-Pacific? And many do consider that question purely through the lens of China and the balancing of some great power competition. But we don't agree it has to be. We can do this in 3 ways. And this might surprise you coming from a defense secretary, but those ways are not primary militarily. First and foremost, by upholding international rules and promoting common standards. Why rules? Because the balance and stability we are talking about today is ultimately based on adherence to shared rules. The Ukrainian invasion is a tragic reminder of the terrible costs when leaders disregard human life, national sovereignty, and the rules-based international system. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is constantly claiming that the system is simply made up by the United States as they go along. Of course, this is a fabrication. He's talking about the very system, including the United Nations Charter, that we conceived, including Russia, together after the Second World War, and for which we fought together in the hope of saving future generations from the scourge of war. Of course, Russia doesn't want ordinary countries to now benefit from those protections or the freedom to choose, because they might not choose Russia. Putin's invasion of Ukraine, trampling sovereignty, brutalizing innocent civilians, is a result of its utter disregard for rules and the belief that might is right. Well, they're wrong, and that's been proven by the international community's determination to enforce those rules. Because rules are agnostic of nations' military or economic power. They are common to all our needs. Their adherence prevents competition escalating into conflict, and disputes are resolved without fear or favor. What unites us is that roles apply to us all, regardless of actor or geography. We are all equal in the eyes of the law. It provides a level playing field. It ensures fair play, which is one of the reasons, I believe, why Singapore has been so successful in recent decades, because of the respect here for the regulatory environment, anti-corruption, dispute resolution, and fair play. And it works here in Singapore, why can't it work elsewhere? Whether you are the smallest country seeking to protect your fishing rights or the largest seeking a greater share of global trade, the rules-based system is there to protect and enable us all. Yes, all, including China. It is why the UK strongly believes so strongly in protecting the rights of littoral states in their exclusive economic zones, as well as in the importance of upholding the United Nations Convention of Law on the Sea. We reject any claims that do not adhere to its tenets. Attempts to restrict the global common are fundamentally damaging to us all and our trade. If international treaties bearing the signature of 157 parties are junked on a whim, this represents an attack not just on one treaty, but on the entire international system. So the United Kingdom will continue to demonstrate that all parties should stick as close as possible to UNCLOS, because responsible powers have a duty to protect international rules, and neither can they take a backseat in evolving those rules as well. We want a 21st system of laws designed by all, for all. The second way we maintain balance and stability is by backing free trade. The UK has always believed in free commerce and capital flows. The more we open up competition, the more we reduce overdependence and build resilience. And neither can we afford to decouple commercially or diplomatically. We believe the best resilience comes from diversification, not from protectionism. That's why the UK is working to diversify our supply chains. It's why we have done deals with Japan, Australia, and of course Canada. And why we are now enthusiastic new members of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. You cannot put a price on the ability to sell to 500 million people with a combined GDP of £11 trillion. And we're building on that momentum, having signed free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, as well as Singapore, Japan, Vietnam, and the Republic of Korea. Third and finally, the way we preserve stability is through the promotion of our principles and values. Coming to Shangri-La and visiting Singapore, I feel immediately at home. Despite very different national systems, we share many of the same principles and values that believe that all nations have the right to chart their own course, instinctive understanding of the importance of global trade, and above all, a belief in fair play. You don't need to have mastered the rules of cricket to know that fair play is ingrained in the British psyche. No matter how big or small you are, how rich or poor, we believe nations should treat each other fairly with respect. The UN conventions reinforce that as a P5 nation, we believe we have a responsibility to help uphold those rules around the globe. And that's where defense does come in, because it has an important supporting role to play, not just in hard power projection, but soft power promotion. The skills and capability of our armed forces are there to help friends when they're in trouble, from humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to crisis management and civilian evacuations, and ultimately in times of conflict. I know you share that view, many of you here. We've seen it in Ukraine. Alongside our troops training Ukrainians in the United Kingdom are Australians and New Zealanders as well as Canadians. The US-chaired Ukrainian Defense Contact Group now includes many countries represented in this room. And we appreciate the very material support that you are sending to Ukraine to help return stability to our continent. And that's because you recognize, as our Prime Minister said recently, the Atlantic and Pacific security is indivisible. Our security is your security. And that's why the UK is becoming more proactive and more persistently engaged in the Indo-Pacific. We've been using our warships HMS Spey and Tamar, our two Royal Navy ships permanently deployed in the region, to deliver humanitarian aid to Sami at Tonga, to help enforce the sanctions against the DPRK, and to undertake 16 port visits and over 20 regional exercises. We've expanded our network of defense attaches and regional defense staff, including the recently restored defense section in Manila in the Philippines. to deepen our understanding and influence over 20 countries. And we've been growing our wider defense presence in the region, whether here in Singapore, our garrison in Brunei, and the recent reciprocal access agreement with Japan. As a result of all of this, we've been able to increase our tempo, conducting over 60 defense activities in the last 2 years alone, from exercises and training teams to staff talks and personal exchanges. And as I speak, there are 45 officers from the regional partners here today attending professional military education courses back in the United Kingdom. And all that activity helps to build those partnerships, because it's only by deepening friendships, knitting together a tapestry of partners and allies, that we can collectively secure our populations and our interests. The UK is a proud member of the five-power defence arrangement, the region's original defence arrangement, established when its security landscape looked very different. We celebrated the FPDA's 50th anniversary in 2021, and from my discussions while here, I'm convinced that it has an even more important role to play in the years ahead. In parallel, we're now entertaining new partnerships with the recent announcements of AUKUS and GCAP with Japan and Italy. And for the avoidance of doubt, these are not just about countering threats or the submarines and planes we're building. They are about a collaboration effort that underpins them, partnering for technology, transferring skills, skill sharing, and information exchanges. They are a national and generational enterprise. They will allow us to sustain our capabilities over a long term, and they'll strengthen our supply chain resilience to help us prosper through the 2020s and 2030s. That's why ASEAN is also so important, and why, in recognition of ASEAN centrality, I formally applied in March this year for the UK to join the ADMM+. It's this partnership principle that runs through everything we're doing in UK defence, as much as it does in our trade. And it's in our refreshed integrated review, and will shortly be reinforced by our Defence Command Paper, Refresh. And it's central to everything defence engagement, and every exchange programme and capability programme, and every exercise or operation. In 2025, our carrier strike group will be returning to the Indo-Pacific. It's a great symbol of our partnership approach, showing that in a more turbulent world, the United Kingdom will not retreat to its own shores, but continue sailing far over the horizon, using our unique convening power to bring like-minded partners together, whether they are in this world, wherever they are in this world, protecting our freedoms to navigate and operate today, and shaping our ability to travel and trade long into the future, so we can focus on what really matters, building the best future for all our people. Thank you.
Secretary of Defense, thank you very much for providing us, I think, in summary,
Well, thank you so much, John, and good morning, everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. Secretary Wallace, Senior Undersecretary Galvez, it is an absolute pleasure to be back here in Singapore for my second Shangri-La Dialogue as Minister of National Defence of Canada. And let me start by thanking you, John, as well as James Crabtree and the ISS team for putting on such a stellar event. You're really rocking it, so thank you so much. Now today, we are here to discuss building a stable and balanced Asia-Pacific. And I'd like to tell you what Canada brings to the table in advancing that goal. Canada is a Pacific country. Our Pacific coast is 25,000 kilometers long. 6 of our top 13 trading partners are found in this region. Et aussi un Canadien sur 5 tire des origines familiales dans la région, comme moi-même. Aujourd'hui, l'Indo-Pacifique est la région économique qui connaît la croissance la plus rapide au monde. As a Pacific country, Canada has a keen interest in building a region that is stable, that is balanced. What does this mean? It means an Indo-Pacific where international rules and norms prevail and all actors engage responsibly. an Indo-Pacific where disputes are resolved peacefully, and ultimately an Indo-Pacific that is free, that is open, and that is inclusive. These objectives are at the very heart of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which we announced last November. Notre stratégie est une feuille de route complète et à long terme visant à renforcer tous les domaines de nos relations dans cette région, qu'il s'agisse du commerce, du développement ou de la défense. Our strategy seeks to open up new opportunities with North Pacific partners like South Korea and Japan. It recognizes and supports ASEAN centrality. And it is forthright about our relationship with China. China is an increasingly disruptive global power that increasingly disregards international rules and norms. Notre approche est claire et responsable. Nous défendrons toujours nos intérêts nationaux et l'ordre international fondé sur des règles. We have to maintain open channels of communication to avoid misunderstanding and have difficult conversations where necessary, because these are the moments where dialogue is needed most. Canada always seeks coexistence and collaboration. We will challenge China where we ought to. We will cooperate with China to find solutions on global issues. Our Indo-Pacific strategy is not just a policy document, because building a stable and secure region requires tangible contributions. Backed by an investment of over $720 million to promote peace, resilience, and security in the region, we are stepping up with concrete new commitments. First, under the Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada is boosting its annual naval deployments in the Indo-Pacific from 2 warships to 3. We will now annually deploy an additional warship from our Atlantic coast, growing Canada's regional presence, particularly in the Indian Ocean. Our bigger footprint this year begins, and the Atlantic-based frigate HMCS Montreal and the replenishment unit MV Asterix are in the region right now and actually visited Singapore just a few days ago. 2 more frigates will deploy from our Pacific coast in the summer, and our ships will continue to operate throughout the Indo-Pacific. As part of these deployments, our ships sail in the South and East China Seas and through the Taiwan Strait in full accordance with international law. This is a clear signal of Canada's commitment to working with allied and partner navies towards regional peace, stability, and prosperity. And we will always act in accordance with international law, including high seas navigation rights as outlined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Our Indo-Pacific strategy also boosts Canada's participation in multilateral exercises in the region, so that our armed forces can have a more frequent and fulsome presence here. The strategy also means that we will work together and train and learn from our partners in the region, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam. And that includes initiatives to advance women, peace, and security initiatives by supporting the meaningful participation of women in uniform. This is an area where Canada has much to share, and importantly, much to learn from our partners in the region. And in this regard, I am thrilled to be joined in Singapore by Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Ms. Jackie O'Neill, who just visited Vietnam and Indonesia on her way to Singapore. Enfin, notre stratégie lance de nouvelles initiatives pour aider nos partenaires militaires à renforcer leur cybersécurité et leur cybercapacité afin qu'ils puissent détecter les cybermenaces et y répondre plus rapidement et plus efficacement. Since 2018, Canada's main Indo-Pacific military mission has been known as Operation Projection. To reflect our enhanced and growing presence, I am pleased to announce that starting this year, this operation will be replaced by Operation Horizon. Operation Horizon will implement the defense elements of our Indo-Pacific strategy, deploying more naval assets, participating in more multilateral exercises, and strengthening our military-to-military cooperation. We know that our allies and partners want to see more of Canada, and I hear it wherever I go, and through Operation Horizon, you will see more of us. A stable and balanced Indo-Pacific also requires a safe and stable Korean peninsula. 516 Canadians made the ultimate sacrifice during the Korean War, the third deadliest conflict in Canada's history. And as Prime Minister Trudeau underlined during his recent visit to Korea, Canada has never left the Korean Peninsula. Our Canadian Armed Forces have continuously served in Korea through the United Nations Command to promote peace on the peninsula. And today I am so pleased to announce that the next Deputy Commander of the United Nations Command in the Republic of Korea will be a Canadian general or flag officer. This will be the second time that a Canadian has held this vitally important post, demonstrating our leadership in the Korean Peninsula. In fact, the first non-American to ever assume that role was a Canadian as well. He is with me here today, and he is now our Chief of Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre. Thank you, General Eyre, for your leadership. To further support stability on the peninsula, Canada recently announced the extension of Operation Neon, through which we regularly contribute ships, aircraft, and personnel to the multinational effort monitoring UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. One of those aircraft, a Royal Canadian Air Force CP-140 Aurora, recently completed a 6-week deployment conducting surveillance to identify suspected violations of UNSC sanctions. And when we deploy our aircraft to monitor United Nations Security Council sanctions against North Korea, we expect all actors in the region to engage responsibly, behave safely, and conduct themselves professionally. Responsible engagement and safe behavior are a cornerstone of a stable and balanced Indo-Pacific, and Canada believes strongly in being transparent, open, and adhering to the international rules and norms that underpin our collective security. Finally, a stable and balanced Indo-Pacific depends on partnerships. L'année dernière, par exemple, le ministre de la Défense, le Dr. Ng Eng Hen et moi-même avons signé un accord de coopération en matière de défense entre Singapour et le Canada. And today I am thrilled to confirm that recently the Republic of Korea and Canada signed a 10-year Memorandum of Understanding on Defense Research and Development. This is just an example, my friends, of how we will continue to forge resilient relationships with our closest partners in the Indo-Pacific, and we will build new partnerships with important regional leaders, India, for example. Canada believes in ASEAN centrality as the foundation for cooperation and stability in the region, which is why we are working to deepen our security cooperation with its members. We appreciate ASEAN's support for Canadian observer status in the 2 ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus experts working groups. We were delighted when ASEAN leaders recently adopted a regional plan of action on women, peace, and security. And I am pleased to say that Canada is on track to finalize its strategic partner status with ASEAN by September, which will enable us to work even more closely with our partners in this vitally important region. Of course, we will always remain tightly coordinated with our closest allies, including our Five Eyes partners, and we are always looking for ways to advance and strengthen our relationships. My friends, every issue that matters to global security in the coming decades, democracy, climate change, human rights, artificial intelligence, and more, will all run through this region. As a Pacific nation itself, Canada has much to offer the region, and the region has many opportunities in turn for Canada. Through our Indo-Pacific strategy, you will continue to see more and more of Canada. And through Operation Horizon, which I've announced today, you will see a larger Canadian defense presence right here in the Indo-Pacific. Alors que l'Indo-Pacifique devient de plus en plus central pour la sécurité mondiale, le Canada doit être et sera un partenaire fiable et engagé dans la région. Canada is here as your partner, and we are ready to work with you to build a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific for all of our peoples. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, pour votre discours et pour avoir expliqué si clairement que votre politique de défense est là pour renforcer les règles de la région et les règles internationales, je suis aussi sûr. I picked up one particular thing in your address, which was an emphasis I hadn't heard before from a Canadian Defense Minister on the diversity of your relationships in the region, because you spoke about East Asia, you spoke about Southeast Asia, including your 2 new bilateral accords, and you also spoke about the Indian Ocean. So that is quite a vast geographical region to which you are projecting influence and defense diplomatic skills. We now turn to questions. I've got about 9 or 10 people on the list. What I intend to do this time is ask 5 or 6 of you to sequentially ask your questions, and then I'll come back to the panelists and invite them to answer in rough proportion to the number of questions that might have been directed principally to them. If I can get more than 5 or 6 in, I will, and then close the panel with their reflections. But could I please ask from France, Valérie Niquet?
Thank you. It's a question to Secretary Carlito Galvez. You mentioned free and open Indo-Pacific and the rule of law, and this is something that Japan shares too. And how do you see the role of Japan in the region, considering the many constraints that Tokyo still faces in military action, including the exports of arms to its partners or close allies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Germany, but also the IISS, Ben Schreier.
Thank you, John. Also 2 short questions for Secretary Galvez, if I may. Secretary, you mentioned that your president has instructed you to, quote, safeguard every inch of Philippine territory. So 2 questions there. First, does that mean that the Philippines is moving from a hedging strategy between the US and China towards a more close alignment with the United States as part of a balancing strategy against China? And secondly, how can the Philippine Armed Forces accelerate the necessary development of more air and maritime capability, including unlocking more funding? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Japan, but also from the IISS, Yuka Koshino.
Thank you, John. I have a question to Defense Secretary Wallace. since you touched on Japan. So NATO-Japan engagement has been gaining momentum since Prime Minister Kishida's attendance at the Madrid summit last year. And we've also seen reportings that NATO plans to open an office in its first Asia office in Japan. The Hiroshima Accord signed during Sunak's visit to Japan last month also stated that the two countries will cooperate to deepen NATO-Japan cooperation. So from your perspective, where are the key areas that Japan can make a substantial contribution to supporting NATO's mission in Indo-Pacific and beyond? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from China, Yongshang Teng.
感谢有发言的机会。我想
Thank you very much for this opportunity, allowing me to raise my question. I just want to make a short comment regarding Madam Anita Anand's speech. So after the Cold War, in Asia-Pacific region, basically stability has been maintained. It is a result of combined efforts of all the countries in the region. So that's why we're here discussing the stability and the balance in this region. Just now, Madam Anita Anand said that China is a destructive force in the region. As a matter of fact, what we're doing is, to the contrary to this, we have been making great efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. Most countries in the region have already become, or to put it in another way, China has become the biggest trading partner to most countries in the region. And in terms of security, we have also made great progress, be it from a bilateral relationship point of view or multilateral relationship point of view. So, Madam Minister, you said that China is a destructive force. Actually, what you said is destructive by itself. China's force has never been extending to anywhere near Canada for any operation. We are not monitoring or supervising any national leaders' speech or dialogue. In order to maintain the stability and the balance in the region, it is true that we need to explore more effective measures instead of base your speech on assumed orders to criticize others. Thank you very much.
Translation there for Minister Anand. I heard the word in English destructive. I think it might have been disruptive, the word that might have been used by the minister. So that might help to sort of lower the level of anxieties in the room and allow for the dialogue to continue on that basis. Could I invite from Singapore, Ravi Veloor?
Yeah. Thank you, John. This is to Secretary Galvez from the Philippines. So earlier this morning, we heard Secretary Austin say that he's going to sit down with you and the defense ministers of Japan and Australia. Now, where do you see these discussions leading to? And given that you're meeting 3 of the Quad defense ministers, and you bought cruise missiles from the 4th that is missing in this room today, what is your attitude to Quad? And would you be open to a closer working relationship with Quad? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the United States, Eldridge Colby.
Thank you, John. This is a question for Minister Anand. I was impressed by the ambition and scope of your agenda and aims in the Indo-Pacific. Given Canada's commitment and strong rhetoric about the Ukraine conflict and European security as well, do you commit to spending your NATO obligation of 2% per year?
Thank you very much. No Minister of National Defense ever is allowed to escape that question. Bill Emmett from the United Kingdom and Chair of the Board of Trustees of the ISS.
Thank you, John. It was striking. This excellent panel in their presentations talked about such a wide range, not just of geography, but also of topics under the heading of stability and balance in the Asia-Pacific. So therefore, I feel I'm not at risk of lowering the tone by mentioning economics, and in particular, economic security. Last week in Japan, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong gave a very striking lecture warning of the risks that the de-risking strategies of economic security may be going too far and potentially leading to a fragmented economic system as well as political system in the region. I wonder if the panel could comment on where do they feel that their country's economic security policies are, as it were, running up against or having contradictions with their diplomacy and their broader economic and foreign affairs positions.
And could I now proceed to your neighbor, Bastian Giegerich from Germany, but also the IISS.
John, thank you very much. I'll take it back to defense, I'm afraid. My question is for Secretary Wallace. So Secretary, you said that UK interests lie as much here in this region as they do in Europe, and I wonder whether you could say a bit how that insight translates into choices in the Defense Command Paper that we will see soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'll take perhaps one more from the Executive Director of ISS Asia, who's done so much to make this dialogue a success already, James Crabtree.
Thank you very much, John. This is a question for Minister Anand. Could you tell us a little bit more about Canada's minilateral engagement strategy in this region? So you outlined some details of the Indo-Pacific strategy of July last year, but Canada is not presently part of some of the new family of minilateral organizations. Recently, you made some comments about a potential ambition to join the non-nuclear components of the AUKUS agreement in the technological domain, or at least to participate in that. Given you're sitting next to Secretary Wallace, perhaps you could come up with a small agreement to participate, or tell us if you'd like to.
Thank you very much. What I think I'll do now is return to the panel in the reverse order in which they initially spoke, giving them each a couple of minutes to address the questions principally directed to them. I will have time, I think, for a second round. I've got 5 or 6 people here, and we'll be able to return to you. So that's excellent. For Minister Anand, there was disruption, there was defense spend, there was minilateralism.
Well, thank you so much for the questions. Excellent questions as usual. Let me start with Chinese, the questions regarding China. I want to be clear that Canada believes that we need to coexist with partners and allies and all countries. But at the same time, we must call a spade, and we have seen increased militarization by China in the South China Sea, including in the region surrounding Taiwan. And that is concerning, and it is really indicative of the need for an approach to be eyes wide open on China, to cooperate with China where we must, but also to challenge China where its conduct is increasing instability and disruption in the Indo-Pacific region. And therefore, in response to the question as to what conduct in particular I am referring to recent conduct by Chinese aircraft and intercepts regarding our Royal Canadian Air Force members who are simply monitoring UN sanctions under Operation Neon in accordance with international law in international airspace. And by and large, those interceptions have been undertaken in a safe and professional manner. But there have been some that have been deemed to be unsafe. We are always going to stand up for the safety of our air crews, and we are addressing this appropriately. And so that is just one example. And as I said, Canada will continue to ensure that we are working on open lines of communication and recognizing the need to coexist responsibly. But when it comes to the safety of our air crew, we must address the issue that is presented, and that includes the one that I outlined. Now, I will move to discuss the 2% question that arose. First and foremost, Canada is a founding member of NATO. We have continuously stepped up in many tangible ways to indicate our undying commitment to this multilateral organization. And one example is our presence on NATO's eastern flank, where we have led the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group in Latvia for over 5 years, the most diverse battle group on NATO's eastern flank, consisting of 11 countries. We are currently moving to brigade level, committing more and more resources, and ensuring we are doing our part in a tangible way. So there are many ways to measure commitments to an organization. That is one. But on the question of the 2% itself, our defense spending is on an upward trajectory. It is increasing by 70% in the 9-year period beginning in 2017. In addition, we committed $8 billion in budget 2022 to defense spending and almost $40 billion to NORAD modernization and continental defense in June 2022. So our defense spending is on an upward trajectory, and we will continue to ensure that we are making meaningful contributions to NATO and to all of our multilateral alliances. And then finally, the question that came to me related to, what was it, John?
Well, there's a question about
AUKUS. Yeah, I think it was on AUKUS. So, as I have continually said, our relationships with our Five Eyes allies are strong. And indeed, I'm sitting beside my good friend Ben Wallace, which is indicative of our continued and ongoing conversations and discussions and collaboration on all matters relating to peace and security. In terms of AUKUS itself, Canada has deep strengths in the areas of quantum, AI, and technological capabilities writ large. And we will continue to collaborate with all of our allies on bilateral and multilateral bases so that we can continue to contribute in meaningful ways as we have been doing.
Thank you very much. Ben Wallace on Japan, UK tilt to the Indo-Pacific, perhaps a bit of de-risking as well.
Yeah, well, look, we could be mistaken if we thought it was just about the Pacific and China and no mention of Russia here. I mean, Russia has a Pacific interest. It has, and if you're in Japan, obviously you're very aware of Russia's behavior, sometimes towards Japan, but certainly in that part of the Pacific. And so, of course, NATO having an office here is in its interest of NATO, and also the importance of sharing lessons both from Ukraine, but also across the sort of NATO disposition in Europe into this part of the world. Japan, an open, liberal democracy with our shared values, trading, important trading partner with us, important technological partner with Europe and the United Kingdom, and therefore having a NATO office there is important for a number of issues. You know, let's not forget, Russia has been quite aggressive in this region and will continue to be so. The Ukrainian war has significantly damaged Russia's land army, but it still maintains a fleet, naval, quite a large naval fleet in the Northern Fleet and indeed Black Sea and indeed over in sort of Vladivostok and around this side of the Pacific. And we see evidence already of Japan moving some of its capabilities to this part of the region that poses a threat to all of us. The Russians have the RERP program, that is the program designed to look at, disrupt or damage potentially undersea cables, undersea energy. All of those capabilities are coming into the Pacific. And we should realize what that means for our vulnerabilities. And we are all vulnerable to global cable threats, whether that is from espionage or indeed just disruption or energy. Energy sort of warfare is growing, sadly. You know, we neighbor with Norway. Norway now supplies 40% of Europe's gas. Right? It's not just Norway's obligation to protect that. It is all European countries have a duty to protect that vulnerability, and that won't be any different here in the Pacific for some of our dependency on cables. So Singapore, for example, its finance sector, protecting its critical national infrastructure, really important. One of the world leaders in disrupting that critical infrastructure, who not only has the capability, but has the intent and does attack critical national infrastructure, as we're seeing in Ukraine, against all international law, against the Geneva Conventions, is Russia. So I think it's important NATO is in Japan to do a number of things. One is to share the knowledge of the threat. And remember, the High North is a place where both Russia and China has an interest of different trade routes. And therefore, you know, for all of us, again, in Europe, that is a direct connection to this part of the world. But also, obviously, the common standards of NATO equipment. We would say, as NATO members, NATO equipment is some of the best in the world. And if you are a member here who spent a lot of money on Russian equipment, I'd be taking it back to the shop. Given what I've seen happen in Ukraine, I would be encouraging you not to waste your money on Russian equipment. It doesn't seem to work very well. And I would secondly say that that common standard that has been often used at the base of Australia and New Zealand and others in their equipment program is a good and open standard that allows interoperability and integration. On the other areas about the EU, the balance between Europe and the Pacific tilt of the United Kingdom. So first of all, it's not an either-or, right? Let's balance this. The British defence budget will top out over £50 billion this year or next. We'll be heading towards 2.3% of GDP and then getting up towards 2.5% as a pledge. That does give us some headroom after some of our NATO obligations. And I think that allows the UK to play to its strengths in this region. One of our strengths is knowledge, the knowledge of our men and women of our armed forces, training, capacity building with our friends and allies in the region, wherever that may be. We obviously have a garrison in Brunei, for example, and that is an important capability in effectively improving deterrence and indeed capacity of our friends and allies in the region, but also deployments of our naval assets and being able to convene our partners and friends from Europe who also have interests here. When we came with our carrier group last year, I was delighted all the way through that deployment. We were accompanied by a Dutch frigate, the Netherlands, and in Europe, you know, countries like Portugal and the Netherlands, in our DNA is freedom of navigation in our trade, it's in our history, it's in our, essentially our economic model, and so it's inevitable that when we come to the Pacific, together we will come with our friends throughout the next few years. And that's an important thing, not only for the United Kingdom, the flag of the United Kingdom, but the flag of Europe, the flag of partners from that side of the world. So I don't think it's an either-or, and as long as we can fulfill our commitments to NATO, which is important, then we also have to, I think, contribute as a P5 nation to underpinning our obligation as a P5 to uphold those rules and law. And finally, on economic resilience, the question there, absolutely right. Britain doesn't think the solution to economic vulnerability or sovereignty is to pull up the drawbridge. We believe it's diversify your supply chain, have choices. So if one avenue closes off, you can work with somebody else in order to achieve what you need for your equipment or your capabilities. And not only by doing that, not only do you manage to protect yourselves, but you also collaborate and strengthen partnerships. AUKUS is a collaboration, but we actually collaborate with many countries in this room, in cyber, in other capacities. And that collaboration is really key to security and defense partnerships. That's how you build alliances. And so pulling up the drawbridge will not help anyone, in my view, protect themselves unless they are a huge economy. There's very few economies on earth that can effectively pull up the drawbridge and do everything from scratch. And even when those economies try, you often find they have to rely on external technology, either acquired, bought, or in some cases, stolen.
Thank you very much. Just before I turn to the Philippines, I want to be a sort of equal opportunities interrogator. I asked your colleague from Netherlands last year this question, so I'm going to ask you the very same question. In 2021, the United Kingdom and the Netherlands jointly did a freedom of navigation patrol in the Black Sea. It was in order to assert the importance of keeping a free and open Black Sea. And some people in this region might question whether Westerners are truly committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific when there's been such difficulty ensuring a free and open Black Sea. We're now relying on an agreement that is permanently tentative between the United Nations, Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia that permits a percentage of fertilizers and food coming out of the Black Sea. The biggest importer of Ukrainian wheat in the world was Egypt. The number 2 is Indonesia, G20 power. Given the poverty and the quality of Russian equipment, should we not take a little bit of a risk and look to see ways in which we do a freedom of navigation patrol in the Black Sea in order to assist the food security of this part of the world?
Well, I think unlike the Pacific, the Black Sea is governed obviously by the Montreux Declaration, which limits, not only even when it's allowing people to come in, it limits the number of foreign warships in the Black Sea at any one time. So, you know, it is in a sense a controlled sea, unlike obviously the openness and freedom of the Pacific.
A reflagging operation wouldn't be possible for a coastal state of Romania?
Look, I mean, it's, you know, the actual Black Sea nations have a freedom to do what they like. We've noticed for many years Russia has abused exercise boxes. They've declared vast swathes of ocean no-go by just declaring it's a live firing area. Even when they don't do any live firing, they have intimidated Georgia and any other who seeks to think it's not just a Russian sea. Look, there's a plus side at the moment in the Montreux Declaration being upheld by Turkey. Russia can't resupply its fleet. Russia is currently using its fleet in the Black Sea to obliterate civilian areas of Ukraine. I mean, when you fire these missiles are being fired, they're fired from Kilo submarines, for example, aimed at everything from, you know, human populations and critical infrastructure. And if Turkey were to allow it to be open, then the first thing you would see is a significant naval reinforcement from other parts of the Russian fleet, and that isn't in Ukraine's interest or ours. But you make an interesting point about grain, right? There is an effort by Russia in places like Africa to blame high food prices on everything else, on everyone from, well, Britain, I think we were described as the eternal enemy the other day. You know, the West, everybody else, that's their fault. It's our fault that the grain prices are in Africa. The reason grain prices are high is because Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. End of story. No other reason, wouldn't have happened, they've caused it.
Philippines, you had a couple of questions on Japan and your tilt towards the United States and how that balances with your approach also to China.
Yes, Japan is a very important ally. All alliance that we had is very important, especially Japan. Japan helped us in three aspects. One is the peace process in Mindanao. They rehabilitated most of the battle-ridden areas in Mindanao, especially during the Battle of Marawi. They donated $200 million for the rehabilitation. Second is also for the modernization of our Coast Guard. They provided multi-role vessels, and also for the armed forces, they donated 5 billion spare parts of our helicopters. Japan is very important also in our Build program because they provided a lot of funds. During our visit in Japan this year, the Prime Minister, the Japan government, assured the Philippines of its support to achieve the high medium level income country, and provided much support of 600 billion yen, and also the construction of the first subway in Metro Manila. So Japan, we are looking forward for having some sort of reciprocal access agreement, and also we are jointly having some meetings with the security and the defense department on how we could have include the Australia and US in our talk. And we are in the Philippines has only two missing forces agreement with Australia and also with the US. So Australia provided us a very intensive training for counterterrorism. So they provided people-to-people skill training to our soldiers. And also Australia provided meaningful strategic education. I came from Australian education. I learned the Australian why. So with that, and I think that's what we are looking, that the support of the different countries, like-minded countries, in achieving prosperous Indo-Pacific, where the Philippines also with that.
Thank you very much. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 questions to ensure 3 different regions of the Indo-Pacific are included, and then give each of our panelists 1 minute to send their final messages to this gathering. So first from Indonesia, Fitriani, please.
Thank you. My question is, I would like to know, aside from the Minister Anand that mentioned the achievement on women, peace and security, I would like to know the commitment of the countries in terms of supporting the advancement of women, peace and security agenda, not only in quantity, but in quality, including increasing access in terms of leadership and command position for women in the armed forces, peacekeeping, as well as leadership in new technology, such as cyber and artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from the Republic of Korea, Bo Ram-kom.
Thank you. I have another unilateral question for our Canadian Defense Minister. In March, Canada offered to lead a new Quad, including Korea, Japan, and the US. I'm wondering if that has gained any traction and what would the agenda be? Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think I can actually squeeze in 2 more. So Gregory Poling from the United States.
Thank you very much. My question is for Secretary Galvez. We've heard quite a bit about collaboration with the United States, Japan, and Australia to enhance deterrence and interoperability, but I wonder if you could speak to what kind of role the Philippines would like to see the US, Japan, and Australia play in peacetime to help push back on the gray zone coercion that your forces face day in and day out.
So that's on the gray zone and how you can cooperate in peace. I'll take 1 more and then come to the panel in the order that they originally spoke in. So Philippines, UK, Canada. Robert Ward.
Thank you, John. A question for Secretary Wallace. The Hiroshima Accord is a welcome statement of intent for continued deepening of UK-Japan relations. The Accord notes the UK's role in upholding the strategic values of the CPTPP after its accession to the bloc. Given the important geopolitical element to the CPTPP, what do you think the priorities for the UK should be in upholding these values?
Thank you very much. So first the Philippines, US, Australia was an important point, then the UK, and we'll close with Anita Anand from Canada. You, sir.
Yeah, during our meeting with Secretary Blinken and also Secretary Austin, we really see the security alliance that we have to expand it to a more expanded alliance, which include economic. That's why during our meeting we push for some economic packages so that we can be free from certain economic coercion in the future. And Japan and US are very helpful on this. So that's why President Biden has promised that he will send his economic team to the Philippines. And we have seen already the presence of USAID providing some assistance, especially during disasters. And I really agree that our future fostering is really to have a close relation with Australia, Japan, Canada, the UK, and the other countries, so that we can really look forward in accelerating the modernization of our armed forces, and also to push for the rule of law based in the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you very much. Just before I move to Ben Wallace, you mentioned the visiting forces agreements that you have with the United States and Australia. There's been a lot of talk of a potential visiting forces agreement between Philippines and Japan that would work within the constitutions of each country. Can you announce any progress on that kind of discussion?
We are on the process of discussions. And actually in the Balikatan exercises, we really explore on possibly expanding the bilateral Balikatan exercises into a multilateral exercises. So in that exercise, we already included, for the first time, 101 Australian soldiers. And in the near future, we might be expanding it with the other allied nations.
Thank you very much. Ben Wallace.
Well, thank you. Obviously, I'm the Defense Secretary rather than the Trade Secretary, but I think CPTT is really important because the principles we have to uphold is, as I sort of said in my speech, that the acceptance of a common standard of the rule of law, of freedom, openness and transparency, as Defense Secretary Austin said. You know, it's important that we engage in our trade in a transparent way, but also that the United Kingdom, I think one of the most important things is be openness to competition, be openness to free trade. That's what it's about. You know, you don't have to tell me in this region the success that free trade has given many of these countries over the last 30 years. If you look at the progress and growth of GDP, that is driven out of effectively free trade and openness, and that has benefited millions, potentially billions of people in this region, and I think that is the real success of it. There's no half signing up, is how I would say. You're either in it or you're not, and we're in it, and we will do everything we can to make sure we live up to the spirit of that.
Anita Anand.
Well, thank you. Two questions came to me there. The first on women, peace, and security. And let me just say that we all have an obligation to advance progressive values, including ensuring equality and non-discrimination of women in whatever institution we're participating in. And for the other women defense ministers in the room from the Netherlands and Portugal, and myself and other women around the NATO table and beyond, that is something we are working on every day internally in our own military institutions, but also externally in our partnerships and our cooperative arrangements with other countries. And certainly in our Indo-Pacific strategy, the externally focused document that I discussed in my speech, Women, Peace, and Security, ensuring that we are imparting and discussing and ensuring collaboration on these important progressive and, I would say, values that ensure modernization of military institutions are absolutely central. But it's not just external, it's also internal. What are we doing in our own military institutions, in our own armed forces to ensure that women have those leadership roles, they're able to ascend to those leadership roles, and they're doing so in a way that is not beset with sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, or discrimination of any sort. And in Canada's case, we are taking a very deliberate and explicit approach to ensuring that women are able to advance in a way that respects their dignity, empowers them, and protects them every single day when they're putting on a uniform in service of our country. And I'm happy to provide more detail offline about those many reforms and initiatives that we are continuing to implement. In terms of leading a new Quad, I just want to reiterate the point that Canada will always stand up and contribute to our alliances, to our partners, to our allies. One of the messages that I am trying to drive home here today is that in this region in particular, you will see more of Canada, whether it's in terms of the bilateral or multilateral partnerships and alliances, whether it is in terms of a third frigate, whether it's in terms of military cooperation and exercises with our partners. The goal is to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific that is stable. As the name of this panel suggests, we all have a role to play in ensuring stability, and Canada will be here to ensure that we are playing our part to build a free and open Pacific as a Pacific country ourselves. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me again invite the audience to do two things. First, we're going to finish this session exactly 2 minutes early at 10:58, so I would hope that all of you return 2 minutes early at 11:28 to ensure that the ministerial lunch will be able to begin smartly at 1300 hours, and we have a really excellent third plenary to look forward to. And then secondly, as the clock strikes 10:58, could you please enthusiastically thank our three speakers for their presentation?